Antimage and Isekai LitRPG Adventure, Ends of Magic Book 1. Audiobook by Kevin Chapter 33. Sailing into the mist. Nathan eyed Eowyn, well aware they didn't have time for an extended conversation. They were in the middle of Litcliffe, and it was very likely that the oligarchs were in the process of mobilizing their forces to attack Nathan and the heirs. Their covert assassination had failed, after all. The heirs might be able to win that fight, but it wasn't a fight they needed to have in the first place. Eowyn still had that faint smile on her face, as if she knew something he didn't. She didn't even seem to be breathing, and Nathan tentatively scanned her with his magical senses, but found nothing but a mess of intricate enchantments that dripped with both mana and wizardry. Everything she wore was magical, from the pale dress to the crown of blackened branches and the flute made from bone-white wood. He'd been warned that she worked for questers, but he didn't know whom. And she'd likely saved Sarah's life from the assassin's strike, but that wasn't enough to completely earn his trust. He was the target, and this could all be a ploy to get him somewhere where she could kill him, like the deep ocean. I've got a lot of skills, but if she kicks me off a boat 1,000 miles from land, I might be in trouble. Who do you work for? Nathan asked guardedly. Eowyn's red-painted lips quirked, though Nathan couldn't tell if it was humor or derision. Can you guess? Would the name truly hold significance to you? Her voice was polite and polished. It made Nathan feel like a country oaf. Nathan narrowed his eyes suspiciously. I was told the name of one I should seek out. Tell it to me so I can start trusting you. He nodded to Kachai. The wolfman took that as his cue, reciting a quick prayer. As comrades in battle, I invoke honesty in our dealings. By the blood we have shed together, we will not lie in this moment. The golden light that bloomed around the entire group was more subtle than what Kachai had been wielding a moment before, but it was no less profound. Ah, Eowyn responded, reevaluating. She held her hand to her chest and blinked, her eyes closed in a gesture that seemed apologetic. I bear the shame of my assumption. Then she opened her eyes and met Nathan's suspicious expression. I am an agent of the quester Saria Pamaris, the Queen of Kehona. She speaks the truth, Kachai confirmed. Nathan exhaled a breath of relief. Finally, are you ready to sail? I've had enough of being attacked by Badad's catspaws. Eowyn's lips curved up into a triumphant smile at his response. Harmonious, let us depart. Since you cannot fly, we must take the streets. We can fly, Stella broke in, already casting the spell on herself before replicating it on Arl and Sarah. It just seemed like a bad idea when everybody could shoot us. I shall cover our passage with my mist, Eowyn said in an unhurried tone, as if this was an everyday conversation. But her feet were already lifting off the ground as her dress blended into the mist around them. She drifted in the wind instead of flying in a straight line like the heirs did. It was surprisingly fast, as well as looking effortless and elegant. Nathan rose in her wake, finding that his upgraded class skill made it easier to ride the wind alongside her. It felt like he could make himself lighter to let the wind catch him and blow him around. A dense bank of fog swallowed them as soon as they rose above the houses. The damp whiteness covered the world in all directions, and Nathan couldn't tell how far his vision went, but it wasn't far. He followed Eowyn with his magical senses as she drifted in the general direction of the docks. He could tell that the fog was magically conjured, but he allowed it to remain within his aura. It still burned away from contact with his skin. I have control over my aura, but my body is still anathema to magic. No magic items for me anytime soon. The heirs flew close behind him. Sarah looked around like a hawk as she gazed into the obscuring mist. They're mobilizing, but everybody seems confused. More ballista there, soldiers on the walls with crossbows. Archer. She trailed off and swapped pistols for her rifle, aiming down the sights. A muted shot boomed out a moment later. She was tracking us. Must have had skills to see through fog like I do. Nathan could feel more groups of soldiers barricading the streets below. several of them carrying potent enchanted siege weapons. Nobody seemed to know what they were doing, and two groups of soldiers were setting up barricades facing each other just a block apart. Probably a casualty of me blocking communications and the mist-cutting sightlines. He considered disenchanting some of the magical siege engines as he passed overhead, but dismissed the idea. Instead, he blocked the detection magic that the soldiers were using to look for targets. He didn't want to give his enemies any clues as to their location. As they approached the docks, Eowyn came to a stop and waited for them. She hovered serenely in midair, blending into the mist except for the black ribbon around her waist and the blackened crown. She turned to face Nathan, and he saw her eyes glow a flickering red as her lips pressed into a scowl. A foul note indeed. They have boarded the Grace of the Mists. Is that a problem? Nathan asked. Is your crew safe? The reply was swift and sharp. I have no crew, and the Grace of the Mists will consume those who dare sully its decks. But the statement is clear. The oligarchs have decided to openly oppose me. She paused to consider the thought. That is a decision they must be forced to regret. She turned and flew down towards where Nathan could vaguely feel the mix of wizardry and mana that was her ship. It was more agitated than the last time Nathan had felt it, and as he followed her, he could sense clusters of guards holding position on the decks. They had detection magic going, but Eowyn slipped through like a wisp of the fog she floated within. Nathan's approach was blunter, tearing a hole in the detection web to prevent the guards from picking up the approaching airs. The mist was even denser here, thick enough that Nathan couldn't see his hand in front of his face. Sarah guided the other heirs through the fog, following Nathan's lead. His eyes were useless, but Nathan's magical senses picked out the moment that Eowyn set foot on the deck of her ship. The magic laced through the entire hull awoke and lashed out at the trespassers in response to her command. Twists of illusion and dream mana spun around the trespassers as they drifted apart from each other, lost in a world of whiteness. One by one, isolated guards vanished, sucked away to a dimensional space tethered to the ship. Well, shit. That's some serious magic right there. Not the kind of thing you could fight your way out of, though I bet Stella and Kachai could bust out with magical might. And it couldn't grab me in the first place. He descended, hovering a foot above the white wood of the ship as he felt the last of the Litcliffe soldiers disappear. The swirling magic came for him next, not seeming to know or care that they were Eowyn's allies. He shut it down hard, absorbing every scrap of the befuddling spell that stretched towards him. The magic of the ship jerked back as if stung. But just moments later it returned, this time reaching out with wizardry to twist and distort the world around the airs. He smashed those tendrils with his aura and snarled towards where Eowyn stood nearby. Control your ship. She let out a demure laugh that was barely audible to Nathan's ears and patted the railing affectionately. The ship's magic calmed down, and the mist lifted to reveal the spotless white deck of the Grace of the Mists. The fog still held in every direction, making it feel like they were within a cavern with walls of water vapor. Eowyn gave them a coy smile and dipped her head slightly to the airs. I acknowledge your virtuosity, befitting those who frustrated Badud's ambitions and sent him fleeing in death. That was Nathan's deed, Kachai said proudly. We are his team, but it was his hand that struck down Giant's Rest and its quester. In single combat, Eowyn asked, one eyebrow arching nearly to her hairline. Nathan shrugged dismissively. He's a mage. Breaking mages is kind of my thing. He gestured towards the front of the boat. Shouldn't we get going? Eowyn spent a second longer studying him as if to discern his secret. Then she turned and began walking to the aftercastle, where a throne-like chair of white wood sat at the highest point of the deck. I would enjoy that narrative, and Saria will enjoy it more. But first we will conclude our time in Litcliffe. The heirs followed the captain up the stairs to the aftercastle, the higher vantage point providing an equally bland view of the fog. The raised area looked like it was designed to be a fighting platform, with gates on the stairs and wooden crenellations rising up from the outer hull to offer cover. The moment Eowyn sat in the chair, the ship shivered, the magic within stretching like a cat waking up from a nap. With a snap of her fingers, the gangplanks retracted and the ropes untied themselves from the dock. A breeze started blowing from behind them, caught by sails of solid-looking mist that materialized on each of the masts. Nathan rolled his eyes at the theatrics. It seemed like it would be easier to propel the ship by magic instead of using magic to conjure a wind and then catch that wind in magical sails. But what did he know? Maybe the symbolism was important. Regardless of the method, the ship surged forward with surprising speed, and Nathan had to set his stance to avoid falling over. The bubble of clear space moved with them, the fog on all sides showing no sign of abating. We will reach the waves soon, as the sun emerges. Then it will be time to navigate the rough seas of the southern coast. Eowyn spoke absently, her attention on the ship she was guiding out of harbor. You have some minutes to rest while the water is calm. As if to contradict her words, the fog all around them suddenly streamed downwards like it was being sucked into the ocean by the world's largest vacuum. Within moments the night was crystal clear, with a picturesque view of the city of Litcliff stretching on the surrounding slopes and cliffs. That can't be good, Nathan observed as he looked towards the city. The palace of the oligarchs especially drew his attention, with the siege weapons atop the various platforms along the cliffs turning in their direction. Eowyn cursed. By the cracked bells! She put her flute to her lips once more and started playing a haunting melody. Mist washed out from her and from the bone-white wood of the ship, but it was immediately pulled into the water they sailed upon. Now that it was active, Nathan could feel the subtle wizardry suffusing the water around Litcliff. It had been there the whole time, calming the sea around the port. He hadn't really noticed it before because of how gentle the effect was. But now it was awake and active, reaching upwards to ensure the sky was clear. The source was also fairly obvious, the wizardry flowing out from the direction of the oligarch's palace. I think whatever artifact is keeping the sea calm is breaking your mist, he called out, moving to the back of the ship. Sarah and Stella, see if you can stop them from firing. He watched as the first trio of tree-sized bolts was launched in their direction, homing in on the grace of the mists. Kachai and Arl, we need this ship intact. He stepped into the air, angling upwards to intercept the rapidly approaching projectiles. Eowyn's song changed from a haunting ballad to a rapid jig, and the grace of the mists accelerated out from underneath Nathan as he stretched out his aura to catch the descending missiles. Each was a massive wooden bolt with metal spikes hammered into their lengths to hold the enchantments. The magic would make the weapons home in on their target and penetrate magical shielding. Their payloads differed. One carried a straight explosive, while another conjured broad force blades to slice their way through the ship, and the last held a double dose of shield-penetrating enchantments. By spending stamina, he was able to extend his aura and catch the weapons a few 100 feet away. They flashed across the intervening gap in moments, and Nathan only had time to disable the destructive payloads before the tree-sized bolts reached him. He tried to divert the one in the center but wasn't properly positioned to do more than let it whiz by him. Not even sure what I could have done. It's a flying tree big enough to stake the Statue of Liberty if she got turned into a vampire. What am I gonna do? Punch it. To his left, Arl brought down the absurdly sized club he'd taken from Joust on the center of one shaft, bashing it off course and into the water. To his right was a resounding clang as the last projectile impacted Kachai's magic-enhanced shield and deflected away, though the impact staggered Kachai and left a scrape along the metal of his shield. A gunshot sounded behind Nathan, but he didn't get the chance to look back. The next set of siege engines had already fired, though not in a coordinated salvo. Kacha and Arl positioned themselves behind and below Nathan, ready to deflect the physical projectiles once he was done stripping the magic off of them. What followed was a frantic minute of Nathan lashing out with his aura to disenchant projectiles, while Arl and Kachai blocked and bashed the weapons out of the sky before they could reach the grace of the mists. Nathan was spending more stamina than he was gaining between stretching out his aura and running across the sky to keep up with the ship as it gained distance from Litcliffe. Aura Control 4 achieved. A few attacks got through, but Nathan didn't dare take his eyes off the sky long enough to look down. They were making progress away from Litcliffe, but the siege engines had range to spare. Fewer were firing now than a minute before due to Sarah's sniping of the crews, but Nathan didn't know if they were doing enough to protect the ship long enough for it to get out of range. What's Stella doing? I was expecting lasers and lightning, but there's nothing. There was a gap in the stream of attacks, and he took his eyes off the sky to look down. A single giant bolt protruded diagonally out of the deck of the ship, but other than that, the vessel looked untouched. Eilin was juking her ship wildly, and Nathan had sensed the dimensional pocket activating a couple of times. What drew his attention was Stella standing at the very back of the ship, staring down at a small orb of dark purple fire writhing between her hands. Nathan recognized the spell from his previous nights of tutoring, though as far as he knew she'd never cast a larger version. She's going for a development. Always better odds of that if the first time you do something is in a fight. But I hope it's worth the risk. He turned back to the onslaught of missiles, hoping Stella would get on with it. As if triggered by his thought, he felt a flare of magic from below and heard Stella cackle, her laughter high and slightly maniacal. She started channeling a serious amount of mana into the spell, and its purple glow reflected off the water below. Oh, I'm worried. After another 20 seconds of charging, Stella let the spell fly, and a car-sized orb of purple fire so bright it hurt to look at blazed underneath Nathan, headed towards the oligarch's palace. It was propelled by a jet of purple fire reminiscent of a rocket engine, and seemed to grow larger as it flew. It was only within Nathan's senses for a second, but he swore the magic was getting more powerful as it burned through the air. It only took a couple of seconds for the new spell to cross the distance to the palace, and the now bus-sized streak of purple flame impacted against a massive magical shield that flickered into view to block it. The explosion that followed was enormous even from this range, a bloom of purple fire that wrapped around the shield and persisted after the protective magic flickered and failed in sections. The flames latched onto the stone underneath, coating the entire palace in flickering purple light. Nathan blinked at the ice-searing display, trying to process what had just happened. At least the siege engines had stopped firing by virtue of them all being aflame. Is that fire burning the stone? Chapter 34, Agent Introductions. Nathan watched the magic burn in the distance, spreading farther and faster than any mundane fire should. The purple flames danced across the oligarch's palace and leapt to the military complex at its base and the cliffs on either side. It eagerly spread to the private docks underneath the palace where a trio of proud warships were preparing to launch. Their frames blackened before the fire jumped to the water. Nathan grew worried. This spell seems able to use anything as fuel, even water. Do I need to go back and put it out so it doesn't consume the entire city or the continent? There's no way it spreads across all of Davrar, right? He watched the flames like a hawk, hesitating as he thought about going back to the city that had just tried to kill him with dozens of siege engines. They've got other worries. I can fly overhead, put out the fire, then fly back. The flames should give me more than enough stamina to catch back up with the ship. Then the fire on the outskirts of the conflagration started shifting from purple to a more natural orange, and the spread slowed. Nathan relaxed slightly and looked down to check on the grace of the mists. The boat had slowed from its headlong dash, though it still cut through the calm waters of the bay on its way towards the dark ocean beyond. End of Magic has leveled to 748. Your party has faced the might of Litcliffe and destroyed their most potent armaments. Spellslayer has leveled to 532. Your party has escaped being hunted by the might of a nation. When he looked back towards Litcliffe, the flames formed a complete gradient, with the palace still blazing purple while the outer sections burned with natural flames. The fires on the water and the bare rock of the cliff quickly fizzled out, though the ships and several buildings continued to blaze. The area covered by the magical purple flames contracted by the second. But it wasn't fast enough to save the central edifice of the palace, which slumped inwards as the blackened stone lost structural integrity. It looks like it'll burn itself out on its own. He turned and sprinted to catch up with the grace of the mists, taking a few minutes to join the other heirs standing on the aftercastle of the ship. They'd been watching him return, and Stella in particular had a white-knuckled grip on the railing of the ship as he descended towards her. He blew out a long breath and landed gently on the white deck. Ahead of him sat the captain's throne, and Eowyn peeked around it with an expression equally surprised and furious. The anger might have had something to do with the 30-foot-long shaft of wood sticking out of the deck halfway along the ship. Nathan turned to face his friends, more specifically Stella. She was already wincing in anticipation of his words, but Nathan kept his voice level. "What spell was that?" "A new one," she replied quickly, the words spilling out of her as she rushed to explain. "Davrar rewards risk and using new abilities in combat. I used the oxidation insights we were talking about to enhance a fireball spell so it could draw on the energy of burning fire mana to sustain itself. I tied the spell to the insight of oxidation so it would get more energy out of burning things. I thought it would make the spell burn harder and last longer." Stella gave him a guilty smile. Harpy's tits, was I right? She looked around at the other heirs to gauge their reactions. Arl was leaning against one of the wooden crenellations with a calm expression, while Sarah seemed mildly amused. Kache was intent on the conversation, but didn't interrupt. She continued. "My design would make the mana in the spell burn for longer, letting the spell draw energy from the fire to make more fire mana, though it should still lose power over time. But I think it interacted with the oxidation insight and natural mana, so that the magic acted closer to the natural laws. That let it get energy out of burning anything even remotely flammable with the oxidation insight. That also meant the mana could draw energy from fire and propagate itself if there was anything to oxidize." "So, why did it burn out?" Nathan asked, more curious than anything at this point. He didn't quite understand what she'd done, but the general details were coming across and he was plenty worried. But if he understood what she was saying, then the magic should have kept burning until all that was left of Litcliffe was slag and smoke. Stella responded with a shrug. "The spell destabilized. I built it as an expanded fireball, without the intention to do more than light a flame. My target was a fire that burned harder and hotter. I'm surprised the spell stayed together so long, though stable spellwork probably carried that burden." "That nearly was a prophecy of death," Kache spoke out, though he also didn't seem especially angry. "My bones say that Nathan needs to be present for additional magical experimentation." Eowyn called back towards them, her voice piercing and sharp. "No magical experimentation on my ship, especially not those magics." Nathan met Stella's eyes, but not angrily. "I agree with Kache. Your magic is starting to get dangerous." He said it like a compliment. The mage seemed surprised they weren't yelling, and a tremulous smile flickered across her face. "You're not going to smother my fire. Stop teaching me your insights. I burned down a city." She gestured back towards Litcliffe, where scattered fires still burned in the night. Nathan looked back, judging their spread. The flames were concentrated on the ruined palace and the complex of barracks and armories underneath it. They didn't seem to have caught or spread to the city proper. That made sense. Most of the city was built in stone, though there were wood constructions here and there. A couple of the richer-looking buildings near the palace had been burned, as well as the military docks, but it didn't look like the flame had reached any residential districts. He looked back at Stella and shrugged. You didn't burn down the city. You burned down the oligarch's palace. They attacked us after promising their hospitality. I think torching their palace is pretty good retaliation for that. I'm glad your spell destabilized, or else I would have had to go back and deal with it. This is the kind of thing we fix by being more careful and talking about it, not by being angry. She still didn't seem to understand, so he tried again. I got mad before when you didn't understand why blowing up buildings was a problem, but you already knew that this was very nearly a big problem, and that you needed to be more cautious. You're going to try and learn how to be responsible with this kind of magic, right? She nodded and he shrugged. I want to help you do that. Did it get you any developments? Yes, she said, a wide grin spreading across her face. I think I killed at least one oligarch and I got. She was about to continue, but then the sun turned on, shining down upon them with a sudden brightness that had everybody blinking. Stella looked up at the sails and seemed to remember that they had an audience. She clammed up and shot a warning look towards where Elin sat in command of the magical ship. Nathan and the rest of the heirs turned to follow her gaze, eyes fixed on the back of the command throne. After a pregnant moment, he addressed its occupant. Elin, let's have the conversation that we couldn't have earlier. You are an agent of Saria. Why are you here? To find you. Her face wasn't visible, but Nathan could hear the eye roll in her response. Come forward that we may speak without twisting my neck. She gestured and the dimensional space attached to the ship opened. 5 wooden chairs appeared on the deck, all set before and below her throne. The heirs walked forward and took the indicated seats in front of Elin. Her throne dwarfed the smaller chairs, making Nathan feel like he'd been called into the principal's office. She lounged in the seat, crossing her legs and looking down on them with a satisfied smile. She didn't seem to be in a hurry to explain herself. Power dynamics, what fun. This seems like a test, but of politeness or boldness I don't know. Likely both. She's trying to see if she can cow us and how we react to authority. Nathan tried again, moderating his tone to be polite. It seemed likely they'd be stuck with Elin for a while, and there was no reason to alienate somebody who could tell him more about questers. Do you know why Saria sent you to find me? The woman leaned forward, looking less ghostly and more pallid in the sunlight. Because she wanted to know what could make Badud fart an ending's damned glacier. The curses sounded especially shocking in her demure tone. Nathan zeroed in on what she'd suggested. What did he do? Can he make the ending of history happen sooner to punish Gemor? Elin's delicate eyebrows arched upwards. At every step you know more than your station should allow. Did you interrogate Badud before you killed him? No, he taunted me before I squeezed the life from him, Nathan replied, keeping a tight rein on his temper. Did Saria let him do that? All around him the heirs watched Elin intently, awaiting the answer to the question that could doom their home. She tapped a slim finger against her painted lips, then sighed gently. I do not know. I am a trusted agent of Saria, but she does not share every secret with me. Her eyes bored into Nathan's. But if she did, it was because she earned something of greater value. If she doomed your people, she did it to save 3 others. Arl chuckled grimly. But they are our people. It's a cursed treasure to win our freedom and be rewarded with an ending. Elin tipped her hand to acknowledge the point. It would be a harsh melody, but such is the way of the games of the questers. I have seen worse rewards for better service. Her eyes grew shadowed and distant before snapping back to the present. The games of the questers are what determine life on Davrar, not the endings. Saria's grid has fought Badads across this sector of Davrar for thousands of years, through 3 endings. Their battlegrounds are nations and their pieces are people like us. Does Saria want us to become pieces for her? Nathan asked, picking up the clues she was dropping. Eilin smiled faintly. Perhaps, though I doubt her plan is so solid. I believe she is curious and merely wishes to know more before she makes a move. She is likely to make you an offer of one kind or another, but I will not predict her actions, for I will surely be wrong in the specifics. Why do you work for her? Katja asked, watching their host carefully. Because I believe in her, Eilin replied airily, but then her tone grew serious. Because Saria's grid stands for freedom and sovereignty, while every nation Badad's grid rules is magical tyranny that builds towards empire. I would fight Badad and his allies without Saria, but she and her grid are the power that can beat them. Her eyes landed on Nathan. Though it seems you can carry that melody too. The heir sat for a moment, digesting her words. After a moment, Stella spoke up in a small voice. There are more slave empires like Giant's Rest. Eolin's eyes flashed. Giant's Rest was small. Esebus controls an entire continent, and Sangred is a palace of wonders in a sea of corruption. But from what I know, none are in the same dungeon. Esebus is a hierarchy of enchanters, where magical wealth determines caste and the lowest are trapped in cycles of debt. Sangred is a collection of guilds built upon magically enforced contracts that range from generous to ruinous. Those all sound like piles of stalker shit, Sarah drawled out. Do you spend your time fighting them? Not openly, the woman said, red lips curving up in a faint smile. Or else I lose free passage across the seas. One side of her mouth quirked down with faint annoyance. I will not be able to return to Litcliffe for at least a century. She's either immortal or very long-lived. Good to know. I wonder if that's a part of her build, a magic item, or a gift from the Questers. Unless the ending wipes Litcliffe out, Arl said resentfully. Eilin tipped her hand in acknowledgement but did not reply. Her eyes scanned the airs, seeming to ask if they had more questions. Nathan had one he'd been chewing on, suddenly hungry for knowledge about Questers now that there was somebody who knew something. What is a grid? Eilin shook her head gently but answered regardless. It is how the Questers refer to their alliances. There are 4 Questers in Badad's grid and 4 in Saria's. He followed up with another attempt. What makes a Quester a Quester? This time Eilin responded with a musical chuckle, nearly a giggle. That is a mystery beyond endings. Questers simply are. I have never heard the tale of somebody becoming a Quester. New Questers appear and rise to power, but it is as if they are born of Davrar itself. She tilted her head at Nathan and blinked coquettishly. If you should ever discover the truth of the Questers, I would give any favor to learn it. Many are those who have tried and failed to join their ranks. Nathan frowned, disappointed that Eilin either didn't know or wasn't going to tell him anything new about the nature of Questers. Well, she has. 4 and 4. And no stories of people becoming Questers does make it more likely they come from somewhere beyond Davrar. He didn't want to be impolite, so he didn't push the issue. The 4 Questers of Saria's grid, Saria Pamaris Brox Thastus. Who else? He kept his tone light, but his eyes watched Eilin carefully. She returned the gaze for a moment without replying, considering his request carefully. Knowledge of the Questers is a precious coin, for they are only known widely in their territories and to those who play their game. But you have delivered Badad a setback and have earned that treasure. The other Questers in Saria's grid are Ushia Mur, the Orcish seer, and Garna Stojal, the treasure hunter and administrator. Nathan had heard at least one of those names before. He scanned back through his memory, searching for the reference. Brox made an offhand comment that he'd had a good bout with Ushia the last time there was a serious war between Gemor and Agman. Ushia controls Agman, Nathan asked, confused. Then why are Gemor and Agman at war if Brox and Ushia belong to the same grid? Eilin nodded slightly. as if a student had just gotten a correct answer to a question. Such is the way of questers. I have no knowledge of that conflict, but questers will often set up wars to polish both nations, to level their soldiers, drive insights, and motivate their expansion. A tenth of the Adventurers Guild died when they attacked us, Arl said, looking troubled by this news. Kachai's voice was bitter. But the war forged elites like your father and Khazar, and drove the founding of Bridgeguard and Tenby. He didn't seem happy to make the acknowledgement, and though none of the heirs contradicted him, they also weren't too pleased about it. Nathan pressed his lips together thoughtfully. He understood why the questers had made the two nations fight. On Davrar, anybody who fought emerged more powerful for it so long as they survived. It's probably a fine line between making the fighting fierce enough to get levels but not kill off too many of your prime combatants. I wonder if that's another explanation of why the elites of each nation fight so rarely. They're already high level, and they're the most likely to kill each other when they fight. Sending out the Guardians of Gemor is like deploying a strategic asset and risking losing it. He looked back at Eilin, thinking about how to reply to this revelation. He didn't know if she considered it a favor, but he wanted to be in her good graces. Then I'll repay your favor immediately. I didn't just kill Badud, but I wrecked his enhancements to his magical casting. I don't know if that lasts through a respawn, but I think it would. He shouldn't be able to cast spells as fast or as powerful as he could before. Eileen's polite mask dropped into an expression of pure shock, and she pounced on Nathan's statement with questions. Did you damage his class? Nathan nodded. I think so. I've done similar things to other mages before. The look of shock quickly became one of calculation. What a welcome harmony. That would explain much. She trailed off, seeming to do several calculations quickly. This is information Saria will much desire. Chapter 35 Enemies of the Depths. The captain of the Grace of the Mists drew herself up in the throne-like chair that sat where a wheel would on a normal sailing ship, and regarded Nathan with a secretive smile. Now I understand why Badud's entire grid has deployed assets against you. You have not just delayed their plans, but struck at their combat power directly. Badud was ever the one with the build to clear a battlefield. Nathan grimaced, his voice bitter. Great, more enemies. Who are they, or is that too much of a favor? You have more than earned that truth. Truly, Saria would. Eilin hesitated, then cut herself off with a wave of her hand. Badud, Ammo, Susu, and Agarius. You know Badud and his powers. Susu is an enchanter and teacher, and she rarely leaves Esebus. In Jark they worship Ammo as a god, and he is seeding that theocracy across multiple continents. The seminary assassins that tried to kill you tonight are his signature. She pursed her lips. And Agarius is an empty silhouette. I have only heard of him from Saria, when a city falls to monsters or an army wins a fight they should have lost. She met Nathan's eyes grimly. Badud is the most powerful in a direct fight, but they are all dangerous. We must be careful, for they can move empires to fulfill their desires. If you crippled Badud, they will want to kill you as a warbeast seeks vengeance for a wound. Is that why the oligarchs of Litcliffe tried to kill us? Sarah asked. The questers arranged it. Eilin gave a soft snort. They merely offered enough wealth to buy the city. Cities like Litcliffe can always be bought. It is only a matter of the weight of the treasure. Enough wealth and magic were pledged to usher Litcliffe into an age of wonders. How do you know that? Nathan asked curiously. I spent the night spying on the oligarchs, Eilin replied without a hint of shame. They are fools in search of money when they should be seeking connections. I could do more for their city than half that amount of treasure could in trade maps and insights of seafaring. Stella looked back towards the city they were quickly leaving behind. It looked like most of the fires had been extinguished, but it was hard to tell in the daylight. A thick pall of smoke still hung overhead, though it was starting to break up in the breeze. Did they get the treasure? Should we go back for it? No and no. Eilin's tone was sharp. The The treasure was promised to them under burden of magical contract, but it would be delivered over the course of a decade. Ah, I see the complexities of financial agreements between large entities spans dimensions. Is Bada the leader of his grid the way Saria is? Nathan asked, refocusing the conversation. Eilin shook her head. Neither are leaders. Questers are as independent as castle bears. Saria organizes more than leads, and I do not believe Badad or any of his allies would give even that authority to any other. They may make agreements in the name of their grids, but none would accept orders from any other. Nathan frowned. But you think Badad's grid is going to attack us on the ocean anyways? Why would they throw so many resources at me? Because, Eilin said, lifting a single finger for emphasis, few questers can face Badad on the field of open battle and hope for victory. He is one of the most powerful spellcasters on Davrar. Her mouth quirked into a cruel smirk. He was one of the most powerful spellcasters on Davrar. For a team of mortals to defeat him is worthy of note, and makes that team a powerful asset in the games of the questers. For one mortal to do so, it is a deed that echoes across the endings. You are a noteworthy piece, and Badad's grid seeks to deny you to Saria, for they know she will wield you well. Nathan frowned at being described as a weapon to be wielded, but he didn't object. His interpretation was that Eilin considered herself a tool to be wielded by Saria, and didn't see it as something negative. She believed in Saria's cause and took the Quester's orders because she trusted her. I'm just not sure if I want to do the same, especially if Saria condemned Gemor to an early ending. But if she did that, she owes me. I can use that to get her to answer my questions, to tell me the truth about Davrar and tell me how to change it. He looked up from his thoughts, reminded of another question he wanted to ask Eilin. Why did you turn us away when we first came to you? We could have left yesterday and avoided all of that nonsense. He waved back towards the direction of the cloud of smoke that covered Litcliffe. If you arrive to a dungeon and find it suspiciously clear of monsters and at the end is a rack of treasure, do you bless your luck and seize the reward? Eilin asked in return, looking around the airs to indicate that the question was meant for all of them. Nathan answered, No, it would be a trap. He looked back up at Eilin, wrinkling his nose at her in confusion. You thought we were a trap when we came to you, she nodded. I expected to hire agents to gather information and then send a carefully worded message to Gemor to contact you. To have you come to me mere hours after I arrived, it inspired a theme of caution, especially when I knew a seminary assassin was in the city. They have marked me as an enemy. I plan to investigate to discover if you were the treasure I sought. Her smile grew wry. When I tracked the seminary to the palace, I thought their target was the oligarchs. But then I witnessed the contract binding. The oligarchs agreed to throw all of the resources of the city against you. It was an expansion of a previous deal, which involved selling information and privileges to the assassins. Nathan couldn't hold back the exasperation in his tone. Truly, capitalism at its finest. I'm glad we didn't trust Joust farther than we could throw him. Or Litcliffe farther than we could burn them. Stella frowned at her attempt to mimic Nathan's figure of speech. We should have gone to Agman, Sarah said dryly. Then Garna would have found us. Only if we survived their politics, Arl reminded her. Eilin watched the byplay fondly, then tapped a finger on the arm of her throne to draw their attention. This voyage will span weeks, perhaps months. Have you sailed before? They all shook their heads, though Nathan's denial was hesitant. I haven't sailed Davrar's seas, that's for sure. I bet there's all sorts of things to worry about beyond getting seasick. Besides, I never did any deep-water sailing on Earth. Eilin clearly noted his hesitancy. Inland boats are not sailing. The statement was made with complete confidence. To sail the seas of Davrar is to enter a dungeon of its own rules with dangers aplenty. Victory is safe passage, and defeat is to be lost beneath the infinite ocean. She gestured towards the bow of the ship, which was currently behind all the heirs because of how they were seated. The ocean has more power than any of you. The heirs all turned to see the waves of Davor up close for the first time. The Grace of the Mists was about to exit the long bay that sheltered Litcliffe, which also meant it was about to exit the wizardry that dampened the ocean's waves. The ship rocked slightly as the first wave rolled underneath the boat, still dramatically diminished by the edges of Litcliffe's protective magic. Nathan squinted, trying to estimate the height of the waves. They marched off into the distance, growing in height as they got farther from Litcliffe. The sound of surf against the cliffs on either side grew in volume until it was a cacophony of water crashing against rock. I think those waves are taller than the masts of this ship. How are we going to sail through that? Nathan found himself reaching for the railing to brace himself as the boat crested another swell, the ship's movement growing more pronounced. The Grace of the Mists hadn't reached the true waves yet, but its bucking motion this far away hinted at the challenge ahead. He shot a glance at his friends, seeing that Sarah and Arl were exchanging uneasy looks while Stella's smile kept growing. Eolin's voice cut through the crashing waves, composed with an edge of anticipatory glee. The seas will test our symphony, all in one. First is the challenge of the waves, then will come the monsters, the storms, and those who hunt the wide curve of the sea. But mark this truth, the ocean is a landscape like any other. It is harsh and deadly, but I know its harmonies. Listen to my commands and we shall never be helpless. She angled the ship into the next wave, climbing up it at a slight diagonal instead of taking it head-on. The ship tilted backwards alarmingly far and Nathan's heart jumped into his throat as he worried about it tipping over. They weren't even at the tallest waves yet. Their captain gave a sharp laugh, the sound like a hawk's cry. Then she flicked one arm out to the side and her flute appeared in her hand. She brought it to her lips and started to play a wild and free song that sounded like a continuation of her laughter. The wind pushing them forward picked up, balancing the ship and driving it over the top of the wave. The heirs held on, able to do nothing but stay upright as they tried to anticipate the motion of the deck. Their chairs stayed solidly in place, some kind of magical effect gluing them to the deck, as the waves tossed the ship like a matchstick. Nathan made sure to keep his aura close as the wizardry within the ship cavorted in time to Eolin's tune. As they reached the peak of the next wave, Stella chuckled nervously, the sound quickly ramping up into a thrilled laugh as the Grace of the Mists dove into the trough between waves to the song of Eolin's flute. Nathan joined Stella's laughter after a moment, the crazy motion reminding him of a roller coaster. It had been a long time since he'd felt so helpless to do anything. I could use airwalking to escape, but I can't do anything to help Eolin get the boat through this. It's all on her. The flute trilled a harsh note, and the Grace of the Mists tacked quickly as it descended the next mountain of water. Nathan only saw why on the peak of the next wave. There were islands off the coast, scattered tables of rock topped with rolling greenery. On each of the islands sat a medieval-style castle. The dour piles of dark stone kept watch over the wide channels that led to the open ocean, mossy stone towers standing tall above the waves. Their new tack was aimed straight through the largest channel, and they had a few more minutes of insanity as the ship climbed diagonally up the face of the towering waves and then careened down the far sides. A few times Nathan was sure the ship was going to dig too far into the side of a wave or flip over, but Eolin's song fluctuated in response as she adroitly piloted them through the passage and out into deeper waters. The waves started to grow smaller as they emerged from the channel. The swells were still large by any objective measure, but compared to the insane heights closer to shore, the waters seemed downright tame. Eolin's flute calmed down as she pointed them towards the distant horizon and then trailed off in a long sustained note. She breathed out a heavy sigh as the ship rocked slightly, her carmine lips stretched in a satisfied smile. Her wind-blown hair settled down around her shoulders as the gusts that had been pushing the ship calmed into a consistent breeze. "A glorious performance," she said, sounding self-satisfied. "But now I will show you your cabins and declare the rules of the ship." At her gesture they all stood and followed her, the chairs behind them vanishing with a snap of the captain's finger. She led them down from the aftercastle to the main deck and cast a nasty look at the tree-sized shaft of wood sticking out of her ship. The wood looked like it was starting to be absorbed by the ship, but it wasn't a fast process. With a quick gesture, the wizardry of the ship activated, and the wood decking rearranged itself into a broad staircase leading down into the ship. Nathan swallowed, drawing his aura tight to his body with a small expenditure of stamina. He didn't want to break the ship, but at least it wasn't a portal or anything. The ship could rearrange itself much like the Ascendant Academy had. I think it's mostly wizardry conjured as well, though in a different style from the Academy. I could probably consume the boat if I wanted, but I quite like having something to sleep on in this ocean. The heirs followed Eowyn below decks, finding the space to be large and comfortable. It reminded Nathan more of a luxury home than a ship. Most of the area under the deck was taken up by a large open living space, consisting of a comfortable seating area and a moderately sized library, though the front half of the ballista bolt stuck down into a reading area, coming just barely short of impaling an overstuffed reading chair. The section towards the back of the ship had a large kitchen done in white tile and a dining table that could fit 20. It makes sense that there's this much room if she's got extra-dimensional space for storage and only needs one person to run the ship. "Your rooms are towards the bow," Eowyn said, guiding them to a corridor that stretched out on the other side of the seating area. She waved her hand dismissively at the half-dozen doors on either side of the passage. "Take whichever rooms you like. There is room for 5 times your number." Nathan winced and scanned the rooms with his magical senses, focused on the beds. They were indeed enchanted for comfort, and he would break the enchantments if he slept in them. With his new skills, he could probably lie down on one without shredding the enchantments, but it would take constant focus that he couldn't maintain while sleeping. He'd have to sleep in his bedroll on the floor. Arl was quick to examine the kitchen, first checking the magical stove before studying a few of the more esoteric pieces of equipment. It was all enchanted to the nines, but Nathan couldn't tell at first glance what each appliance was supposed to do. But Arl laid a finger on each of the different pieces in turn, chuckling and making appreciative noises before he touched something that looked like a stand mixer made of crystal and light. He gasped, looking back to Eowyn. "This is incredible," she smiled. "You must have an identification skill. Yes, the mixer is wonderful. I will demonstrate its use later." Their host watched as they scoped out the rooms and chose their sleeping arrangements. She lifted a curious eyebrow when Nathan got his bedroll from Arl and laid it on the floor, but made no comment. "Where are your rooms?" Stella asked her, looking around curiously. Eowyn pointed up towards the aftercastle that lay underneath the ship's wheel. "There. Do not enter them." The heirs all nodded respectfully, and Eowyn smiled. "Come, let us sit and discuss the rules of this voyage. The oceans must be respected, and that means learning some basic lore." Chapter 36. The Soul of the Ocean. Eowyn ushered them all to the seating area, politely gesturing for the heirs to sit on the overstuffed chairs and sofas arranged around a large fireplace. She went to a side cabinet, opening it and reaching inside to pull out a few drinks while they took their seats. She paused with her hands inside the cabinet and seemed to come to a decision. She put most of the bottles back and pulled out one bottle that was a bright and sparkly pink and a second darker one. She poured out 6 small glasses of the bright pink liquid, adding a dollop of amber liquid on top of each. Then she distributed the drinks around the room and raised her glass. A victorious mission earns an expensive toast. Nathan took a quick sip of the drink, eyes widening slightly as spice overwhelmed his taste buds. It was quickly followed by a wave of numbness that traveled in the wake of the fire. Nathan burned some focus and stamina to quickly determine if there were any poisons in the drink beyond the high level of spice and mild numbing agent, but found nothing beyond a few mild stimulants. All of the heirs looked to Nathan for approval. He fought to keep his expression steady and eyes from watering as he gave a sharp nod of approval. They all turned their attention back to Eilin, raising their glasses to match her. She rolled her eyes at the display. "You learn your lessons." Then she gave a toast, the words formal and a bit nostalgic. "May we evade the eyes of the questers and live lives in the spaces left between their footfalls." She threw her glass back and drained the entire thing at once. Nathan and the heirs followed suit, and Nathan lowered his glass to look around with a guilty grin. Arl coughed and choked while Katja growled indignantly. Sarah's breath whistled through her teeth as she glared at Nathan. "Didn't you taste that?" he shrugged. "It's not poisoned. I kind of like it in moderation." Stella smacked her lips, examining the glass and swallowing a few times. "So did I." She seemed uncertain about that, inhaling a few more times to feel the air flow across numbed teeth. "Yeah, that's the dragon's breath. Can I have another?" Eilin was thrilled. "I am pleased beyond song to have found another with the taste for fine things." She took Stella's glass and reached for Nathan's, raising an eyebrow at him. He shook his head. "No thanks. You were going to tell us the lore of the oceans." "I would," she said, pouring another 2 drinks and coming over to sit near Stella. "For the oceans are a realm of their own. To truly understand them would be to know the history of Davrar. While the lands are swept clean with each ending, the oceans persist. They have never started anew. The ocean of now is the same ocean that every monster has entered since the third ending birthed them." The heirs didn't have any commentary, but Nathan did. "Survival of the fittest," he said, pressing his lips together as he thought about the implications. "The things living in the ocean now are the ones that killed all of the weaker monsters, but it's still got to be a functional ecosystem." Their host seemed surprised at his answer but gratified. "Indeed, they are dangerous beyond any monster of the land. The true powers of Davrar, such as yourselves, believe themselves above simple monsters. You respect dungeons and intelligent foes, but the monsters in these waters have survived uncounted years of vicious fighting. They are to be respected." Nathan frowned. "Is that really true? That means they're adapted for fighting each other in the water and scavenging food from the ocean. They're probably excellent at underwater survival, but they can't be particularly developed to eat ships." There wasn't a word for evolution, so he used developed instead. "That is a new thought," Eilin said after a moment of contemplation. "It may be true, for I have survived centuries on the oceans with them underfoot. But the true monsters of the ocean are still beyond what you have faced on land. They are calamities to be survived, not beasts to be killed." Stella sipped at her drink, nose running from its heat. "But if we can kill them, should we?" Her eyes gleamed at the idea of a challenge. Eilин's mouth took on a wry slant. "When appropriate. Some monsters are too large to notice us, and the danger is being caught in their struggles. For those we must avoid notice. To sting a bear is to be swatted as an insect." She waved a hand. "But others may take an interest in the ship, and those must be slain or chased away." "What can we do to help?" Arl asked. "I can't fight underwater very well. My own abilities can harm underwater targets with ease, and the ship is protected from underwater attacks." Their host rolled her wrist around to indicate the heirs. "But some monsters will try to escape my attacks by emerging from the water to attack us directly. While you are aboard the Grace of the Mists, you must defend us from anything that directly attacks the ship. Kill them if you are able." She swept her gaze across the heirs and focused in on Stella. "Do not use large spells that would draw the attention of a larger monster. There are few leviathans, but to draw their notice is death. The heirs all nodded thoughtfully. Arl smirked. I wonder if the death dagger could slay a giant sea monster. Eowyn sighed at Arl's tone and opened her mouth to reiterate her point, but Nathan caught her eye and gave her a decisive nod to communicate that the message was heard and understood. He could also see Sarah and Kachai seriously considering what she'd said. Stella spoke up, a grimace on her face. If I can't use flashy spells, I need to acquire water mana. It's a blasphemous insight to learn. Nathan made a note to find time to chat with Stella about that later. It should be easier now that they weren't constantly freeing cities, on the run from assassins, and writing a book to kickstart an industrial revolution. Truly, this cruise will be a wonderful vacation. What of other ships? Kacha asked with a faint grumble. You spoke of enemies sent by Badud's grid. Will they come for us? Mayhaps, Eowyn responded, her expression troubled. This ship is as hard to grasp as the name would suggest, but there are those who could follow our wake. None who would expect success. She paused briefly, then continued in a concerned voice. There is one group that Badud could hire to sail against us. It would stretch even the wealth of a quester, but the sailors of the Maelstrom have captains who could track me. Pirates? Nathan asked curiously. Eowyn waved her hand to dismiss the term. Everything, traders, smugglers, delvers, raiders, and yes, pirates. Wherever the gray sails roam, they gain treasure. They take what they can and trade for what they cannot take. Everything can be found in the Maelstrom. Artifacts of collies, immortality, slaves of any species. All of the heirs tensed at that last comment, and Nathan sighed. Not surprising. Is there a quester who runs the Maelstrom? Yes, Eowyn replied grimly. None of the questers I know, but the ruler of the Maelstrom is named the Maestro and is a quester from the Aleph Grid. Nathan couldn't help but sigh. The Aleph Grid, another group of enemy questers. Unfriendly to Saria but not outright enemies, Eowyn said, finishing her drink and allowing her hair to fall in front of her face. They are a large grid with hundreds of questers. Their conflicts involve teams of questers fighting together. Saria and Badud are lone predators to their pack. But Badud could hire a fleet from the Maelstrom if he was willing to part with a true treasure. The heirs were quiet for a second, trading disquieted looks. They were all thinking about the idea of multiple questers fighting as a team. That sounds terrifying. Though once the heirs hit level 729, maybe the playing field will be more even. Sarah let out an aggrieved sigh. If we destroy this fleet, will the Aleph Grid seek our deaths? Eowyn shook her head minutely. No. Few are so unreasonable as to expect us to die at their whim. I do not know of him, but from the tales on the wind, the Maestro respects skill and self-defense. He will turn his anger on Badud for hiring ships to a lost battle. Stella's face lit up. That's a light in my eyes. How do they fight? In a storm, Eowyn replied. They bring the winds with them and shroud their target in wind and spray before descending with magic and metal. She shook her head. I cannot best them. If we see a storm, I will attempt to flee and hope they were not paid to chase us for long. Nathan raised both eyebrows. Is their control of the storms magical or skill-based? Both, Eowyn said bluntly. The captains of the Maelstrom are storm mages with magics and skills to control the ocean and summon their preferred weather. She turned her gaze to Stella judgmentally. Contesting a storm without water mana would be above your station. We'll see, Nathan said noncommittally. We might be able to give them quite a bit of trouble. She looked back at him and dipped her head. Mayhaps, but I will still choose to run before their storm. She trailed off, looking into the distance before sighing in annoyance. We are attacked, though sea cutters are a pest, not a true threat. May I ask you to counter this irritant? This feels like a test. Not just of our capabilities, but of how agreeable we are. How much we'll follow her direction while on her ship. And if we're stupid enough to fight while tipsy. Nathan gauged the other heirs. They seemed ready and willing, and Stella drained the rest of the glass she'd been sipping at, placing it heavily on the table. He faced Eowyn. You are the captain aboard this ship, though we know our own abilities." They all stood, and Kachai wordlessly pulsed healing through the room to sober everybody up. The stairs flowed down from the ceiling, and a faint whistling sound came from above. Nathan saw a flash of scales as something flew by overhead. "Are they jumping over the ship?" He spoke over his shoulder as he climbed the steps. "Let's stay cautious. An easy fight taken lightly is just as likely to kill you as something more serious." Another fish crossed overhead, fins spread wide and beady eye looking down at him. "Beware the fins and save the meat," Elin called up from her relaxed post on the couches below. She didn't seem to be paying them any attention, but Nathan could feel her focus through the wizardry of the ship. She was paying very close attention. It really is a test. What impression do we want to give her? Nathan considered the question as he finished climbing the stairs. So far their interactions with Elin had been driven by caution and necessity. But now he had a chance to tailor the image that the heirs presented. Should they try to hide their capabilities in case they needed things in reserve later, or should they pull out all stops and try and impress Saria's agent? We should try to impress her. All Saria knows right now is that we killed Badud. But her next impression of us is going to be shaped by the report Elin gives. I want Saria to see us as competent, not disposable assets. I have my own agenda, and she's more likely to respect that if she respects us. It would also help if the heirs could differentiate themselves from Nathan. So far he was pretty sure Elin saw the heirs as extensions of him, useful but hardly relevant against questers. In general, he thought he detected a faint air of disbelief and condescension about the woman that he would like to dispel. Decision made, Nathan murmured to his teammates as he reached the deck. "Show off." His inattention nearly caused him to take a bladed fish through the torso. There was a quick twist of water mana from one of the silvery torpedoes arcing over the ship, and it suddenly shot towards him like a bolt from a crossbow. He twisted out of the way, though an outstretched fin sliced along his sleeve. The appendage parted cloth and the skin underneath easily, the edge sharp enough to cut Nathan despite his enhanced durability. The wound bled for just a moment before it sealed up seamlessly. His sleeve was a lost cause, though. The fish bounced across the deck, and Nathan got his first good look at the attacking monsters. The sea cutters were the size of a large dog, covered in metallic scales that looked more like a suit of armor than skin. 3 long fins and a tall, fan-like vertical tail flared from its sleek body, the edges narrowing to an invisible sharpness. The fish slapped its tail into the deck to launch itself in the air, leaving deep gouges in the wood as it propelled itself back into the water with another flash of water magic. How is it moving so quickly with water magic? It's not in water. Is it pushing on the water in its body? There's not enough magic for that. Another fish shot towards them, but Arl emerged from the staircase and cut the fish out of the air with the disintegration-edged greatsword, letting 2 bloody halves smear across the deck behind them. The other heirs emerged from the ship just in time for a cloud of fish to rise from the waters all around the Grace of the Mists, seemingly drawn by the presence of prey. Arl had time for a wry jibe. "Pests, huh?" Then the storm of scaled monsters descended upon them. Nathan dashed away from his friends, gaining distance and letting them form a smaller perimeter without him inside. He found himself ducking and dodging through the chaotic mass of scaled bodies, barely managing to evade the hundreds of fish darting above the deck. Behind him, he felt the flare of magic and the boom of firearms as the heirs defended themselves. He kept dodging, focusing on the movements of the fish. They were still adjusting their trajectories sharply with strange flares of water mana. But beyond that there was a pattern to the monsters' maneuvers, a flow that allowed the fish to turn and swoop without hitting each other. With a few seconds of concentration and a couple more nasty wounds, Nathan figured it out and joined in with their dance. He flitted in the gaps of the flying fish's movements, slipping between the aggressive sweeps as they dodged each other. Parkour 9 achieved. He used the reprieve to study their magic, honing in on the mechanism they used to move. It was new and different, and he wanted to understand it. But each use of the magic only lasted a fraction of a second, and hundreds of them were going on all around him. And somehow it allowed the fish to jet through the air like they'd been fired from a bow with a tiny fraction of the mana that should have been required. What is going on with this magic? It almost feels like a light touch of wizardry. Thank you for listening to the story on KevinAudio.com, Chapter 30, 7 Turbulent Waters. The sea cutters schooled around the grace of the mists in a cyclone of armored scales and razored fins. They scored gashes in the railings and threatened Nathan with dismemberment at every moment. But he danced through the openings in their swarm. It would have been impossible if he'd been stuck on the deck, but by moving with the rhythm of the monsters, he avoided their strikes. He swam through the air like one of them, darting and dashing in spurts that coincided with their abrupt jerks of acceleration. The rapid starts and stops pushed his movement abilities to their limit as he tried to understand just how the sea cutters were moving so quickly. Each time one of the monsters changed course, there was a twist of water mana, but the magic wasn't strong enough to accelerate them as quickly as they were going. Additionally, the shape definitely wasn't a spell. But Nathan could feel a nearly instantaneous flash of wizardry accompanying each motion, though it was too fast for him to probe into. Wizard fishes. What will Davrar come up with next? Gunfire and the sound of heavy bodies striking panes of force sounded below Nathan as the airs fought against the onslaught. They were acting as the eye of the storm, waves of scaled bodies swirling around to strike. Blood sprayed widely as Sarah and Arl struck out at the swarm, but the violence just seemed to feed the frenzy of the attacking monsters. Nathan extended his aura out tentatively, intersecting with the nearest fish, and trying to interfere with their magic to see what happened. He succeeded, though not entirely. The fish nearest him still changed direction, but did so without control. Several of them slammed into each other and more blood gouted as their fins cut through metallic scales like a sword through paper. I still don't really understand what's going on here. This is a much smaller and more efficient application of wizardry than anything I've seen before. Tranquility 2 achieved. Then lightning blasted out from Stella, chaining through the school of fish. The spell was paired with a magnetic field to keep the lightning contained above the ship and prevent it from touching the water. It seemed that she'd listened to Eowyn and wanted to avoid tempting any other monsters. She still managed to hit every single fish that was over the ship, including Nathan. The lightning stung a bit as it coursed through Nathan, with Stella's skills partially converting the magic into natural lightning. But his anti-magic was powerful, his body was tough, and this wasn't her most powerful spell. She's generally pretty good at keeping that out of the spells that hit me. Stella's spell also knocked nearly every sea cutter out of the air. A curtain of flesh dropped to the decking all around, more fish falling into the ocean on both sides of the ship to float upside down. A few of the monsters closer to the airs were steaming with the amount of energy that had been conducted through them, but the rest were still weakly flopping around. They regained energy with every passing second. Nathan saw Arl step out and slash apart the nearest dozen fish with a quick combination of blows. But then the fish started to twitch, and he stepped back into formation. The heirs all took a second to reset their stances. Sarah slid fast loaders into her pistols while Koch reset his shield and renewed the dome of golden force that protected the heirs. Stella started channeling another spell, strengthening the magnetic spell to contain a stronger lightning burst. The monsters recovered from Stella's magic in a wave that started at the farthest corners of the ship and converged on the heirs. They leapt back into the air like a single body to resume their swarm, accompanied by a wave of water magic that fueled their flight. This time, there were enough sources of the magic repeated in quick succession for Nathan to figure out the effect. It reminded him of the drilling motion the fire elemental in Fireface Pass had used to break into the mana pools of dead mages, the one Nathan had copied to learn to drain and then break mana pools. Except the sea cutters were doing just enough to hook into the metaphysical barrier that separated the realm of wizardry from reality, exerting force on it to propel themselves. Arcane Insight 3 achieved. I didn't know it was possible to use that barrier to generate physical force. He fit himself back into the pattern of the schooling fish, darting in sync with their movements. But this time he mimicked what they were doing, hooking his anti-magic into the mystical barrier that coated all of reality and pulling with a hefty stamina investment. His aura had never before been a conduit for force, but it worked well enough. Nathan was sent jetting forwards, directly off the side of the ship and through a swirling blender of sharp fins. Arcane Nullfield 8 achieved. The notification was the first thing he saw as his eyes came back together from his unintended journey through the storm of sea cutters. He shook himself free and used his aura to drag himself back towards the ship, feeling the muscles of his right leg and left arm heal as his left foot and right arm started to grow back. At least they didn't manage to cut through my spine. I need to get better at healing dismemberment. It seems to happen frequently, and it's annoying to have to wait a few seconds for the limb to grow back all the way. He used his functional appendages to get back into the dance of the fish, but was forced to rely more and more on his aura to dodge the onrushing monsters. It was jerky and completely unlike the motion of his muscles, and Nathan spent focus in addition to stamina in order to control the motion and avoid throwing himself through another scaled blender. It worked well, and within moments he was coordinating, kicking off of thin air and pulling himself around with his aura. Congratulations, you have developed the acceleration utility skill into impulse. Utility skill. Impulse. This skill allows you to accelerate very quickly in any direction with a stamina expenditure, and precisely control your direction with an efficient focus expenditure. Well, that's new, but gratifying. I'm glad I took a moment to understand the fish. Nathan spread his aura out to encompass the airspace above the ship, suppressing not just the water magic but also the wizardry used by the monsters. Now that he understood the trick, it was relatively easy to shut down. The fish fell out of the sky again, bouncing off the golden shield that surrounded the airs and littering the deck in a solid layer of flesh. But this time they weren't stunned. The fish started flopping around the moment they hit the deck, scoring gashes in the wood and in each other. A few managed to flip themselves over the railings, but most remained trapped on the ship. Nathan answered the heirs' questioning looks. They're stuck. Let's clean up. The heirs split up, each taking their own approach to slaughtering their way through the beached monsters. Stella brought out a plasma torch and carved through the monsters' scales, spreading the smell of charred fish over the entire vessel. Kachai swung his hammer like a blacksmith, each blow crushing the head of a different fish. Sarah moved carefully, lining her pistols up with a weak spot on the forehead of the sea cutters, and pithing them with single shots. But Arl killed as many as the rest of the heirs combined, striding around the deck like he was out for a casual stroll as two greatswords swung around him in a blur of barely visible metal. He neatly decapitated most of his targets, but a few swings ended up cutting through 2 or even 3 of the sea cutters at a time, leaving bisected chunks of bleeding flesh on the deck. Nathan abstained from joining the massacre. Instead, he descended to the railing and looked down at the water, watching the ocean with worried eyes. Shapes flickered below the surface, and a few more sea cutters shot into the air. They tried to adjust towards him and uniformly failed as soon as they entered the reach of his aura. Most fell right back into the water, but one arced up at him and swung a fin. He pivoted on his heel and punched it right in the head, sending it back into the water with a splash. But the sea cutters weren't what Nathan was concerned about. He eyed the blood gushing through the runnels and off the deck of the Grace of the Mists, staining the water below a bright red. Is all of that blood going to attract something nastier? He turned around as Kache brought his hammer down one final time, shattering the skull of the last living sea cutter. The splash of gore dripped off his armor, leaving the shining metal spotless. The heirs shared a series of satisfied nods, looking around the field of slaughter with pleased expressions. End of Magic has leveled to 759. You have defeated a school of sea cutters that attacked you on the open ocean. Spellslayer has leveled to 536. You have won an open battle against a swarm of monsters. The stairway morphed out of the floor, pushing some of the carcasses aside and allowing Eowyn to climb up to survey the deck. She looked around with an expression that was somewhere between disgust and gratification. That was a harmony of slaughter. She waved a hand towards Arl. Would you butcher them and store the meat? The stasis cabinet is against the port wall. Should we be worried about the blood causing a frenzy? Nathan asked, pointing down at where blood continued to run out through the runnels. Eowyn followed his finger, then shot a quick glance over her shoulder towards where the continent was fading away behind them. The scavengers this close to shore are not aggressive. They would only attack if we were to promise a meal and withhold the bounty. Toss most of the flesh overboard and we will have no more attackers, only followers. That will warn off other opportunists who seek to investigate our ship. With a shrug, Nathan got to work, helping Katja and Sarah toss most of their victims over the side. Soon enough, the waters around them churned with activity as other ocean dwellers tore the carcasses apart. There was some amount of fighting, but most of it was a bunch of different scavengers frantically scrambling to claim their part of what was left of the school of sea cutters. Nathan watched for a moment before turning away with a slightly green face. He'd seen tentacles 6 inches thick and at least 20 feet long curling along the surface of the water, questing for pieces of fish. They gave him the shivers. I've definitely fought scarier things before, but it's the thought of not being able to see in murky water, of not knowing how big that creature is or how many there are that's scary. I think that's called thalassophobia. But right now that seems like a very reasonable fear. It could be something like a jellyfish, or a shark with tentacles for a mouth, or, I dunno, a hive mind of tentacles stretching across the entire ocean. I don't know, and that's what's scary. Arl quickly harvested hundreds of pounds of fish and joined in cleaning the decks while Eowyn surveyed their work like a queen watching her subjects. As soon as they cleared each section, she flicked her finger and the decking cleaned itself as if scrubbed by an invisible crew. That's not what it was. It was a simple application of wizardry that detached everything that wasn't wood from the deck, and then gave it a little kick overboard. After they were done, she drew out her flute and played a calming song that seamlessly healed the gashes in the hull. It also accelerated the process of the ship, repairing the wound from Litcliffe's siege weaponry, though that would take a while longer to be completely fixed. Once she was done, she withdrew the white wood from her lips with a flourish that made the flute vanish into her dress and clapped her hands together with a vulpine smile. Let us enjoy the bounty of the sea that has delivered itself to us. The meal was excellent. Arl was a pretty good cook, but Eowyn danced circles around him in the kitchen. It was obvious that she'd been doing this for a long time and had customized the equipment to her exact tastes. And they were good tastes, Nathan had to admit. They lingered around the large dining table, sipping a light cordial and luxuriating in the feeling of eating at a proper table with food that hadn't been cooked with the enchanted cooking equipment stored in their dimensional bags. Arl raised his glass to their host. A cheer for Eowyn, our savior from a nest of hydras. May the grace of the mists dance around questers to the ending of history and beyond. Cheers. The rest of the airs mirrored the action. Eilin gave them a brilliant smile, her teeth white against red lips. Then her look at the airs deepened, taking in their upright postures. How many battles has it been since you had a respite, a true period without fear of attack? Does that include the sea cutters? Sarah asked, jerking a thumb up towards the deck. Eilin dipped her head silently and allowed the silence to stretch, prompting an answer. 11, Sarah said in response, her tone unsure. Stella shot her a disbelieving look, so Sarah clarified. Since leaving Housemit to investigate the monastery of Quaz. Then we saw the fall of the academy, fought our way into the city, joined Nathan, she trailed off, glancing towards him. It's been even longer for you. All of the time we were in Housemit, you were in Giant's Rest. Yeah, Nathan said, letting out a tired breath. It wasn't all battle, but even when it was quiet, I was still in Giant's Rest. It really feels like that night in the Edrani Empire ruin was the last time there wasn't something hanging over us. After that was Khazar and the Fortress Foundry, then that thing with Tial. We've been at war with Giant's Rest ever since. We haven't even really won since our real enemy was always Badad. He looked back towards Eilin. Can you win against a quester? Not truly, she replied, her words slow and bitter. You can hinder their interests, destroy what they build. But you can never end them. They will always return, and they only need to defeat you once. She shook her head, banishing her thoughts before returning her attention to the airs. I hope this voyage is a harmony of peace for you. I have seen true powers ground down by constant warfare, always considering the next battle and never their whole lives. I bid you each to seek your center and set your eyes on the horizon. She paused again, but none of the airs interrupted her. The captain of the Grace of the Mists clearly had experiences beyond any non-quester they'd interacted with before, and it would be foolish to turn down her advice. Consider your developments and what efforts may complement them. Use this time to practice with your new abilities and ready new insights for your future challenges. You must rest, but true power emerges not just from battle but from careful forethought. This is the time for that. The advice seemed to resonate with Nathan in a way that felt like a mental skill. He took a second to probe what Eilin was doing, but it definitely wasn't interfering with his decision-making process. It was trying to help them unpack the advice she'd just given, to convert something that sounded superficial into the deep principle it was, closer to tutoring than leadership. Eilin watched them all over the rim of her glass, studying their reaction to her words. I need to be faster, Sarah started off with a shrug. I need insights for rapid aiming. There are always targets and I need to hit them quicker. Arl picked up where she left off. I need to practice combining the different parts of my arsenal. I have a dozen weapons that would each be considered a relic, and I need to figure out how to use them together and while flying. Kachai's voice lacked the confidence that Nathan had grown familiar with. I must understand my ethos, he said hesitantly. I began my path mirroring the principles of Damon, but now the principles that matter are my own. I must decide what they are. He sounded a little lost. Stella's expression was sour. I need to learn water mana. It's a weighty power when on the ocean, but it's not the path I want to walk. Eilin frowned slightly at Stella's response, but then turned her attention to Nathan. He blew out a heavy breath. I need to understand my new class and what it means. I haven't been using it to its full potential. Chapter 38 Magical Melodies. The next morning, Nathan found Stella sitting near the front of the ship. I think it's called a bow, but none of us really know the terminology, and I don't think Eilin cares. Maybe they don't even have specialized ship terminology on Davrar. Her legs dangled off the side of the Grace of the Mists, damp from the spray splashing up. Her focus was on the water below, especially the point where the prow cut through the ocean like a plow through earth. Nathan took a seat next to her and watched the ocean for a little while. They were beyond the waves and islands of the coast and well into deep water. The weather was fine, and he could see to the horizon without any obstructions. Or what would have been the horizon on Earth? On Davrar it didn't look the same. Instead of a clear line separating the water and the sky, the ocean never seemed to end. It stretched into the far distance, visible until the haze of the air made the surface of the water blend with the vague clouds above. I've suspected for a while that the surface of Davrar curved up instead of down. The world overhead, the sayings of seeing your home overhead. The night sky, is Davrar a Dyson sphere? The far side is way too close for it to be a proper Dyson sphere, but I already know the sun's not a real star. Davrar could be on the inside of a sphere. He turned his head 90 degrees, studying the horizon off the side of the ship instead of directly ahead. It looked subtly different, though it was hard to tell. Nathan turned to Stella, breaking their companionable silence. "Do you have a stick? Something long and straight?" She jumped slightly, surprised by his voice. Then she thought about the question for a moment. "Will a spelpel work?" She rifled through a dimensional bag before pulling out a long rod of metal, thin and absolutely straight. "It's a teaching tool for learning to precisely control mana flows. I haven't used it in years." "Perfect." Nathan took the rod and held it out at arm's length, closing one eye and superimposing it over the horizon. It almost matched, but just almost. He rotated the pole 90 degrees from directly ahead to directly to the side. It took him a few more observations to be sure, but about 10 degrees off from straight ahead, the horizon curved down in both directions. 90 degrees away from that, the horizon curved up in both directions, and the horizon was more defined. Ahead the horizon wasn't as clear, as if there was an infinite amount of water hiding beyond the atmospheric distortion. The effect was very subtle and mostly noticeable because the day was so clear, and because the curvature of Davrar isn't downward like Earth. I can see dozens of miles, hundreds, instead of just a couple, so even a very slight curve is visible. But I think it's curving up ahead of us and not curved at all to the sides. Nathan handed the spelpel back to Stella, who put it back in her bag and cocked an eyebrow at him, inviting explanation. He didn't say anything, instead remaining deep in thought. The horizon curved differently in both directions. In one direction it curved up, in the other it curved down, and there was a difference in the distance to the horizons. That meant Davrar wasn't a sphere, it was a cylinder. One direction was down the length of the cylinder, and so it curved up to both sides, and the other was around the inside curve of the cylinder, and so the horizon wasn't as distinct and appeared to curve down in both directions. It could also be a spindle that tapers at both ends. If it was big enough, it wouldn't be obvious. And Davrar is damn big. It could be a toroid if I was on the inside curve. But a cylinder fits Occam's razor better, as well as the legends about seeing home overhead. He let out a heavy breath and leaned back, looking up. His gaze stretched beyond the faint clouds, towards the world above. He couldn't see it right now, but he remembered the continents and oceans that could be seen stretching across a clear night sky. Those features look about the same size as Earth does from the moon. Using that as the best yardstick I have, Davrar's about 250,000 miles across, compared to about 8,000 for the Earth's diameter. No wonder the curvature is impossible to notice if you're not on the ocean. It's 30 times further across, and the curvature of the surface would be nearly impossible to notice unless you could see uninterrupted for hundreds of miles. He thought through the math. A huge cylinder or spindle meant it was possible that the gravity was rotational, but Nathan didn't remember the math to figure out how fast it had to be spinning for that. It wasn't a particularly important answer regardless. How much more surface area is there? Estimating pi as 3, on the order of 200 million square miles for Earth, and assuming no end caps and that Davrar is as long as it is wide, then what, 200 billion square miles for Davrar? 1,000 Earths. That isn't as large as I was expecting somehow. Somewhere between 5 and 10,000 continents. He could easily be off in either direction, but probably not by more than tenfold unless there was a factor he was completely neglecting. He waited a moment for a blue box from Davrar rewarding him for the realization, but nothing happened. It's not a magical secret the way the secret of the seals was. It's just how Davrar works. I'm sure if I had a class dedicated to science or exploration or skills dedicated to understanding Davrar, they'd be going crazy right now. But I don't. I have skills for fighting and killing, because that's what is needed on Davrar, not a scientist. He sighed again. Beside him, Stella rolled her eyes. What prophecy of death has your attention? Will you grace me such terrible knowledge? Nathan chuckled. Nothing like that, understanding Davrar, that's all. He waved his hand towards the horizon. It's a big cylinder, though the ends might be rounded. It might even be spinning to provide gravity. Stella's eyes narrowed and she glanced out towards the horizon, then looked back at him. Explain. Which part? All of it, she replied evenly. Nathan didn't get any ranks in tutoring for showing Stella the parabolic horizon or explaining the concept of rotational gravity, but he did when she called over the rest of the heirs to hear it again. Tutoring 8 achieved. Arl squinted into the distance. If Davrar is a cylinder, why don't we see anything but the far side? He waved upwards. Shouldn't we see the land sloping up on either side? Too big, Sarah said thoughtfully. Too much weather. If you look at an angle, there's going to be clouds somewhere in the thousands and thousands of miles of atmosphere between you and the sides. Arl contemplated that for a moment, then shook his head in confusion. Then why don't clouds block the view to the other side? There's probably no atmosphere around the sun. If there was, then the pressure down here would crush us, Nathan explained. It's also probably true that the sun only illuminates a portion of the cylinder at a time, and at night it's mostly facing away from us, illuminating the far side of the cylinder. Kachai watched the sky above, eyes boring into the blue expanse beyond the sun. 10,000 continents, each the size of ours. Stella watched him with a small smile on her face. Too many for your flame or not enough? Both, Kach replied hesitantly. Davrar is no longer endless. There is a limit to the horizon. But to change something that rules 10,000 continents, he trailed off, it is a dragon's task. Or a quester's, Eilin said from behind them, making everybody but Nathan jump. She'd approached them quietly, using the wizardry of the ship to hide her presence. What is your goal? What drives you young masters from your home to seek out questers and their games? The heirs turned to face her, presenting a united front. Nathan spoke for them. The endings. We want to stop them. Eilin gave an unsurprised nod as if confirming a theory. Not a new theme, but a worthy one. Endings and questers are tied together with the strongest threads. She paused, considering her next words. I know no details of the endings, but I know Saria mislikes them. Speak to her of your goal. She won't kill you for it. Do you want to stop the endings? Arl asked, a bit confused by Eilin's supportive but hands-off answer. Her retort was calm but firm. Would I wish to slay all monsters? To cut the root of death? I do not think the endings can be stopped, but I have sailed these seas for centuries and learned to work its currents in places where a young captain would seek to master the ocean and make it obey their will. Some of those captains have succeeded. I hope that is your prophecy. With that she turned and walked away, leaving the heirs watching her ethereal form cross the deck and disappear into the bowels of the ship. She's half a quester herself, isn't she? Sarah asked. Kachai snorted. Kinder than any quester we've met. The heirs all shook their heads, remembering Brox's antics, especially how he'd almost gotten them all killed for kicks on a few different occasions. Arl frowned at Stella. Wasn't your task to learn water mana? How did you start talking to Nathan about the shape of Davrar? Stella threw up her hands. Nathan came and sat next to me, then faster than a stalker's pounce he's speaking of the horizon. Sorry about that, Nathan said with a wince. Tell me about water mana. Enjoy the insights, Sarah said, getting up and dusting off her hands to follow Eilin below deck. I still need to understand what it means for Davrar to be spinning. The rest of the heirs left, leaving Nathan and Stella sitting with their legs dangling off the edge of the boat. The water zipped by underneath, slipping past the magically enhanced hull without resistance. Occasional waves splashed against the grace of the mists, the speed of their passage blowing the water back into their faces. Water mana. Stella spoke the words with a faint edge of disgust. She reached for her dimensional bag, pulling a scroll halfway out before shoving it back in as another wave splashed up at them. It's a blasphemous form of matter. You've spoken to me of water. It's made of oxygen and hydrogen, produced when they burn. The molecules stick together enough to keep them liquid but are always moving against each other. She gestured angrily at the vast expanse of water before them. Hear me, that insight is not helping me get water mana. Before I've combined your insights with everything my parents have given me, and it's always helped me hit the target. The insights of Earth, of natural laws, provide the foundation for me to build my developments. Then my parents' insights are the spark that triggers it all. But now they speak of completely different things. I can't join the two aspects together at all. What do your parents' scrolls say about water mana? Nathan asked curiously. Stella shook her head, frustration bleeding through her tone. They speak of water as ever-changing, always in motion even when still. That makes sense since the molecules are always moving, like what you said about temperature. But it's not enough. She subsided for a moment. There's also a section about water being free, always moving in its own way. Unpredictable and uncontrollable, but I have the insight to control it. It isn't unpredictable, it always flows downhill and you can predict where it's going to flow. Ah, Nathan said, a sudden thought striking him. Does the scroll say that it's important to think of it as unpredictable when you try to use the mana? Stella hesitated. Not quite. It says that the spirit of the water is to follow its own path, despite every effort to control it. By understanding this, you will master it. She mimed throwing an object into the ocean. How do you control something by giving up control? And with the insights of molecules, I should be able to gain water magic anyways. Why can't I hit this target? She turned to Nathan, searching for an answer. Nathan sat in thought, going over what he'd learned of fluid dynamics. I think the insight for water mana isn't about the molecules of water moving against each other. It sounds like it might be rooted in something we call chaos theory. Chaos? Stella asked, apprehensive. What does that have to do with water? I need to explain what my definition of chaos is, Nathan replied. It means that it's impossible to predict what's going to happen. But if I know all of the natural laws, then I can predict what's going to happen, Stella protested. Yes, theoretically, Nathan agreed. But you don't know the exact position of every molecule of water. In a chaotic system, every detail matters. Small changes propagate until the entire system behaves completely differently. He gestured out towards the ocean. You can predict the waves of the ocean, but if a ship sails through, then the wave patterns will be different for days afterwards, even when the impact of the ship is so small against the entire ocean. Stella nodded along, locked onto Nathan's words. I still could predict everything perfectly, but that would require knowing every detail of every molecule. If I was wrong about anything, then my prediction would be completely wrong. Probably not the time to bring quantum uncertainty into this. I'm not even sure it would impact anything. I don't know if electron in a box applies here. Yes, Nathan replied. As opposed to a stable system, where it doesn't matter how things start since they'll always converge on the same endpoint. But that's because there are forces pushing things to always end the same, like water flowing into a hole. What else is chaotic? Stella asked, her eyes alight with excitement as she digested this new principle. Weather, Nathan said without thinking, then actually gave it a second. Honestly, most things in the physical world are chaotic. Say I dropped a coin on the deck. Where it lands would be chaotic, because it depends on exactly how it lands on every bounce, and exactly what part of the boards it bounces off of. Too many variables to calculate. That's a chaotic system. I think in my systems biology class it was referred to as exponential amplification of error through nonlinear interactions. I like my explanation better. Then the way to control water with water magic isn't to control the flow, Stella said hesitantly. It's to control where it wants to go. I need to dig the hole for the water to flow into, not try to force it to go to that spot. Nathan shrugged. I'm not sure. I know a little bit about chaotic systems in biology, but I'm not an expert. But if I were to guess, it would be more about letting your mana flow with the water, even as it escapes your control. You want to control the direction of the flow, not the details. Stella nodded again, deep in thought. After a minute, she stretched her hand out, pushing basic mana into the waves beneath them. It was pulled along with the water, and Stella let it go, watching the threads of mana fragment and twist away as the waves washed by. She continued this exercise for a little while and then tugged on the strings. They broke apart, accomplishing nothing. Try controlling all of the mana, not just the parts closest to you, Nathan suggested. Stella gave a faint dip of her head but didn't say anything, completely focused on her next attempt. Once more she pumped mana downwards, letting the wave action mangle the mana's structure into tiny fibers that followed the vortices and twists of water. Then she pulled on all of the mana evenly, not trying to bring it together but just providing energy and direction. Threads of water spiraled up out of the ocean's surface. They hung suspended in the air just off the bow of the ship, refracting the light like 100 frozen raindrops. Chapter 39, Divine Tenets. The Grace of the Mists was a fast ship. Nathan had been aboard for several days, and he hadn't really appreciated how fast they were moving. But now he was in the air and trying to keep up. It was not easy. He could match pace with the ship if he spent stamina and sprinted, but he knew that he could do better. He'd gotten new movement skills from his recent class development, and one of his core mobility skills had recently developed. But it was one thing to have new abilities, and another thing entirely to use them all effectively in concert as you ran across the sky at high speed. So Nathan ran across the sky, trying to get used to using all of his mobility skills together with airwalking to keep up with the ship. I thought I left running drills behind in high school. The goal was to make it unconscious, so that he could move at top speed while dodging attacks, disabling magic, and taking in the battlefield. If he needed to think about a movement skill, then it wouldn't be useful in battle. But the only way for it to be truly effortless was to practice, practice, practice. Impulse 2 achieved. I was hoping for Airwalking 8, but I'll take it. After running all morning, Nathan returned to the deck and settled next to where Stella was practicing with her new mana type. They'd had a party after she developed the ability to cast water spells, but now she was buckling down to do the hard work of actually learning the spells. Right now, she was suspending a half-dozen car-sized orbs of water off the side of the ship and working on moving them around without hand gestures. "Can I get some mana?" Nathan asked, wiping his brow and shivering a little bit in the ocean wind. Stella grunted and held out a hand, dark purple fire blooming in her palm. It was enough mana that without Nathan it would have consumed her and lit the Grace of the Mists aflame for a dozen feet in every direction. Nathan blinked at the display, but his aura was in position and he drank greedily of her magic. "Thanks," she grunted again, then swore as two of the balls of water collided and merged before splashing back into the ocean. "Harpy's tits." She turned a mild glare on Nathan. "Let me concentrate." He held his hands up. "Sorry for the distraction." "Thanks for the mana." He walked away from her, looking at the other heirs. Arl was practicing weapons forms, alternating between different weapons. Nathan watched as he cycled through the same series of attacks a dozen times, trying out a new combination of weapons with each attempt. It looked bewildering to see a series of uninterrupted attacks made with greatswords, sabers, a trident, a giant club, and more. Sarah was below deck, reading her way through the library. Nathan didn't want to disturb her. But Kachi was sitting at the front of the ship, staring towards the horizon. His armor was positively dull compared to its usual shine. He saw Nathan looking and waved him over, a troubled expression on his face. I guess the bow is the place for deep conversations with Nathan. Nathan sat down cross-legged beside his friend's armored bulk, taking a moment to appreciate the sea breeze before speaking. Then he turned to Kachi. "What's up?" "The sun," came the grumbled reply. Nathan blinked at his friend and tilted his head in confusion. Kachi wasn't usually flippant. Kachi gave a dark chuckle and smiled wryly. "A dim joke, but I find it difficult to discuss my current thoughts, harder than it is to think them, for what remains inside my head is not true until it makes an impression upon the world." "It's about your faith," Nathan replied seriously. "You don't follow Damon anymore. You haven't called upon him directly for a long time." It was something he'd noticed in the time since they joined back up. Kachi nodded but was slow to speak. "I follow the path of faith, where I pay homage to the divine and receive power in return. It is possible to follow the tenets of a god and receive their power without belief, but it is mere embers compared to the flame of true faith. That was an early lesson. My class was dim before I truly accepted the tenets of Damon as my own and put my trust in his power." The wolfman's eyes were distant. "He is the god of righteous battle. To follow the path of a paladin of Damon is to seek injustice and face it in open combat, to be honest in your hatred and direct in your response. Damon teaches that the best battles are the simplest ones. His disciples are supposed to stand strong against obvious evil and strike it down. It is a worthy path, and by that stalwart belief I matched you and the other heirs in our rise to power." Kachi paused again, and Nathan almost responded. He had plenty of thoughts to share, but it didn't seem like Kachi was done. After staring at the horizon, Kachi spoke again. "Kia fights monsters. She saves people from unthinking beasts and preserves civilization. She avoids fighting people as much as she can. I did not understand why. I saw Giants Rest and knew them as evil." The way he said the last word made it absolute, a judgment that would brook no compromise. Giants Rest and the Ascendant Academy were an enemy worthy of a follower of Damon. Even after I seized a shard of divinity from him, it still carried the same shape, the same purpose. My power was merely a sliver of my gods, no longer connected to the whole but still of the same hue. He pursed his lips. But even a fight against such an obvious enemy carried complications I did not expect. It was not an honest war. Damon is a god of justice through combat, of blessing the valorous so they may carry on the fight. The worthy may be healed, but his powers do not extend to mercy. But I fought and killed those compelled by their masters to oppose me. It was not within my power to free them, for freedom is not a tenet of Damon. Kachi looked up and met Nathan's gaze. His own eyes had been dim thus far in the conversation, but now they flickered with a faint glow. It wasn't quite the shade of gold that Nathan was used to. "To follow your light, I twisted my own divinity away from that of Damon. I proclaimed a virtue beyond his reach, and it allowed me to bring freedom to Giants Rest." The wolfman let out a deep sigh. "But now I am lost. I still believe in the tenets of Damon, to seek out a worthy enemy and strike them down for their evil." He trailed off. "But any enemy beyond monsters is not so simple. At every turn I see conflict against a complicated foe." We forgave the evils of many mages I would have killed on the field of battle, even while we were allied with a killer of children. Then the city of Litcliffe became our enemy through greed. His voice rose in tone, becoming nearly frantic as he expounded on the situations that had led to his conflict. "But how does one fight honestly against a city? If we killed the guards who opposed us, we would have left the city defenseless and condemned innocents to death from monsters. The oligarchs took a contract against us, but their rule is not evil. We would be justified in killing them, but would it be just? He asked, waving a hand back towards the continent they'd left, still visible as a faint blur on the horizon. The teachings of Damon still resonate within my being, but hear me. I know they are insufficient for the coming conflict. I cannot fight every battle honestly. I cannot judge every enemy with the bright light of Damon. I must change my beliefs to adapt to the reality of Davrar. He made grasping hand gestures as if reaching for something to hold onto. But how? How should I forge my faith? I stand upon a precipice, and to misstep would be to lose my power. He glanced over to Nathan, his eyes dim once more. He looked lost. Nathan swallowed. Well, that's a lot. To start with, I think you're putting too much pressure on yourself. You don't need to solve the entire problem immediately. You followed the teaching of Damon before, but you don't need to write the teachings of Kacha anytime soon. Or ever, most likely. I did write the teachings of Nathan, but it's heavy on chemistry and pretty light on philosophy. He continued without a pause. You also shouldn't expect to find a perfect answer to this problem. In fact, I would be worried if you tried, because that meant you would be deceiving yourself about something. This question doesn't have a perfect answer. Kacha frowned at that, but Nathan held up a finger. You will always need to adapt your faith to new situations. If you don't, then you'll eventually be caught off guard again. Trying to create the perfect belief system is a trap, because there will always be an edge case where it doesn't make sense. So accept that this isn't a problem you'll ever permanently solve. The wolfman's frown lessened, and he dipped his head thoughtfully, acknowledging Nathan's point. Yet still, I must find a new edge to hold. Nathan nodded in return. Of course, but a question: what do you value? Kacha looked up at him, mild confusion on his face. That is what I search for. Shaking his head, Nathan explained. As I see it, your beliefs stem from your values. You decide what is most important, and from that figure out what tenets you follow. If free will is most important, then you'll always free slaves, even when they're likely to die because of it. You'll tell the truth, even if lying would be easier. But if you decide that saving the most lives is important, then you might kill an innocent to save many more, or tell a lie to save a life. Kachai's face went through a series of expressions, like he was trying to decide how to respond. By Quenfi's flame, why does free will mean you don't lie? Nathan shrugged. If you lie, you deny somebody a choice to act on the truth. You make the choice for them, denying them of their free will. If you respect their personhood, then you have to give them the full details and trust them to make the responsible choice. The wolfman cocked an eyebrow. And if they choose to be evil, part of the full details would be warning them about the consequences of their choice, Nathan replied. And if they choose to be evil, then you carry out those consequences. You're still respecting their choice to do evil by delivering retribution upon them. Koch gave a low hum in response to that, brows knitting in thought. He sat back and didn't say anything for some time as he considered Nathan's comment. Nathan was happy to give him the time to think. He was in deep water here. He'd only had a little bit of exposure to formal ethics, and he knew that if he tried to be too aggressive, he'd get something wrong. Guiding Koch badly now could have disastrous ramifications down the line. Not only does his path rely on him believing in a personal code, but there's a chance he ends up as a prophet of a new religion or something. So I should be careful what I say here. What if I decided to save all innocents regardless of risk? Kacha asked, giving Nathan a questioning look. Then the only thing an evil person has to do is take hostages, Nathan replied, and they will force you to do stupid things. That's a quick way to die. Kacha grimaced, nodding his acceptance of the answer. After another brief period of thought, he looked up. Then what should I value? I can't answer that, Nathan said. You need to decide that for yourself. Kachai pressed the issue. What do you value? Nathan leaned back with a heavy sigh, bracing himself on his hands and looking up at the sky. I think that if you try to define an explicit morality, then there will always be a situation where it makes you do something terrible. And look, The problem with the real world is that you never know everything. Life never boils down to a true trolley problem. There's always complications. He sat forward, scrubbing his hands through his hair. I basically believe that you should do whatever will help the most people, but with a lot of caveats. For one thing, taking people's choices away harms them a lot. Even if you're trying to help them, making choices for others is questionable at best. Nathan remembered late-night college discussions and his frustrations with what he'd heard of formal ethics. Every ethical dilemma is so contrived. They're fun thought experiments but hard to derive actual values from. Things are never so clear-cut, and it's rarely your responsibility to take decisive action. But then again, I never thought I'd be in a position to truly make life-and-death decisions where the answer wasn't obvious. And to be fair, most of my decisions have been easy. Giant's Rest was an easy enemy to hate, and monsters aren't exactly more complicated. But killing mages of Giant's Rest, even those who never did direct evil, that one was harder. I try to care about everything, from how happy people are to what choices they are able to make. It all matters. People are allowed to do stupid things, but not when that endangers or oppresses others, because those others have just as much right to their choices. I try to think about what I've done so that I can do better next time. He paused, ruminating on his mistakes, like the murders in Housemate right after he'd gotten his assassin class. His words were rapid and impassioned, nearly a rant. I'm not perfect at making choices. We needed to stop the Giant's Rest army to keep Housemate free, but doing so meant drowning hundreds of enslaved soldiers. There might have been a perfect solution to kill or strip power from the mages without killing the soldiers, but we couldn't find it. So we did the best thing we could think of, that also saved the lives of most of the Gemor adventurers who would have died in that battle. Then they lived on to protect Gemor. He paused, closing his eyes and breathing for a moment to calm himself down. He was surprised such a simple question had gotten him so worked up. When he opened his eyes again, Kachai was watching carefully, his eyes glowing faintly. He didn't look judgmental, just curious. Nathan's next words were measured. The important thing is to become the person who will do the right thing in the moment. The most important decisions are the ones where you won't know everything, and you don't have the time to think it through. You need to care about the people who the decision will affect, to respect them as people with their own wants and desires. Then you pick the option that is the best. He spread his hands wide, signaling that he was done with his explanation. I think that's more or less virtue ethics if you want to get pedantic about it. Kachai took a long breath through his nose like somebody who'd just taken a hit of something potent. Slowly, a smile spread across his face. That is wisdom. I will consider it as I plan my path. Nathan nodded to his friend and got up, taking to the sky to get back to airwalking practice. Tutoring 9 achieved. Chapter 40 Lessons of Teamwork. The heirs fell into a routine over the voyage, practicing separately and coming together for meals and occasional conversations. Eowyn proved to be an adept cook with over a dozen different styles of food at her command. She accepted Arl as her assistant and apprentice after he demonstrated basic competence, and he remarked that if he'd had cooking skills, he would be getting developments by the score. Sarah and Stella delved into Eowyn's library, both discovering the wonders of fiction and the joy of curling up with a book for hours on end. Nathan joined them, though he found the storytelling to be somewhat prosaic. It was almost more of an anthropological study for him, to learn about the different cultures of Davrar based on the books they wrote. He searched for histories or reference tomes, but found the library to be fairly lacking in heavier reading. I wonder if Eowyn prefers to keep only the lighter stuff, or if the nonfiction is hiding away in that dimensional pocket I can feel. I probably shouldn't check, since I'm pretty sure any attempt will break it permanently. Kachai spent long hours on the deck, clearly deep in thought while his eyes and armor glowed with subtle golden light. Nathan made himself available if the wolfman wanted to talk, but he always met Nathan's eyes and gently shook his head. The main thing Nathan focused on was practicing with his new skills. He'd acquired and evolved nearly every one of his skills relatively recently, though under conditions that hadn't let him thoroughly practice integrating them all together. Some of it was basic, like testing the range of Magic Jammer with Stella, while others were more complicated, like attempting to combine all of his movement and dodging skills into a cohesive whole. The problem was that, while most of his skills worked on a mostly unconscious level, they were all high enough level that they also unlocked new possibilities that he still needed to think about how to use effectively. Effortless dodge allowed Nathan to move in ways that were impossible to replicate unless he was dodging an attack, and he knew it was possible to combine that with momentum mastery to pull off truly ridiculous stunts. He could even use his aura to jerk himself around with impulse, but it took a lot of attention to weave it into the necessary shapes, and he still didn't have good control over the resulting motion. Airwalking hasn't advanced since the Ascendant Academy fell. I've been using it in almost every fight, but it stayed at rank 7 this entire time. Is it because I'm not using it to its full potential? Is it because only a few of those fights have really challenged me? Is it because the insight for airwalking isn't really mine and was given to me by Kia? He didn't know, but he resigned himself to practicing for hours each day with his skills, fueled by frequent lightning bolts from Stella when she took breaks from practicing with water mana. Eolin had thought it was funny the first few times, but after the 30th air-shaking blast of electricity, she'd gotten tired of the practice and asked Stella to switch to fireballs. The ranks weren't coming easily. Even Impulse, which was only at rank 2, stubbornly refused to increase. Nathan was getting better at actually controlling his movement, using his half-dozen abilities together to move easily across the sky. He was especially improving with Galefoot, which allowed him to ride the wind when it was moving in the right direction. Unfortunately, that one couldn't rank up, as it was a class skill. He was also on the lookout for an insight for effortless dodge, which was capped out at rank 10 and ready to develop into the next level. That skill had developed from the dancing drills that Emerald had taught him, but Nathan didn't have any good ideas for where to take the skill next. Finally, after quite a bit of work, Nathan got a blue box, though not the one he'd been hoping for. Impulse 3 achieved. He descended to the deck again, wiping sweat from his brow and taking a drink of water from a pitcher. He blew out a deep breath and looked up to where Arl was practicing in midair. The brown-skinned man had been at it for a few days now. At first the motions had looked remarkably like high-speed flailing, as each of Arl's swings sent him spinning slightly. It's probably good he hasn't had to duel anybody in midair yet. Now his motions were much more decisive and controlled, and a dozen different weapons flashed out in lethal arcs towards an unseen enemy before vanishing into dimensional bags. Arl descended to join Nathan, his helmet melting off his face. He held out his hand for the pitcher. Nathan handed it over. "Looking good. Need any help?" Arl shook his head as he chugged, then stored the empty pitcher away and pulled a fresh one out of his pocket. "Likely no, though I will accept your words. But my practice is clear. I have the arsenal to fully use my skills and need to practice it. How is your effort?" "Fine. Not going as well as I'd hoped." Nathan scrubbed a hand through his hair. "I'm trying to rank up airwalking, and it's not easy. I've got a lot of new skills of my own to incorporate together, and it's happening, but slowly. I don't know if I'll get the rank ups I'm going for. I've also got a capped dodging skill to develop and no ideas." The corner of Arl's mouth curled in amusement. To encourage a rank up, deadly combat is the true target, if not combat sparring, as dangerous as possible. Nathan narrowed his eyes. "Are you quoting Stainel?" "Yup." "Are you volunteering?" Nathan asked. Arl shook his head. I don't think sparring would help either of us anymore. To truly threaten you, I would need my enchanted weapons, and with only a little practice, I would have no more enchanted weapons. You could use your unenchanted practice weapons, Nathan suggested. Maybe, Arl replied with a shrug. They'd certainly fail to hurt you, and they will break when caught between my strength and your durability. He pointed towards the back of the ship, where Sarah was watching the ship's wake. She'd been trying to shoot the occasional fish that showed themselves to help her aim and fire quickly. My sister would be the best target. Her weapons can hurt you, and she needs a better practice partner. Nathan was skeptical. What, just have her try to shoot me? That doesn't seem like a good idea. Arl waved a hand at him. Follow your light. You'll have an insight or two for her as always. Be sure I'd ask if I thought you could help. Nathan frowned but glanced towards where Sarah was standing, statue, still with her rifle in the ready position. Was there a way that Sarah could help him out with his practice while he helped her out with hers? I could be a pigeon for a bit, but she'd shoot me down pretty quick. Guns are hard to dodge. She'd be better served by clay pigeons. He chuckled at the image. If normal people on Earth could shoot down clay pigeons with a decent chance of success, then Sarah would simply never miss. All of the heirs were well into the superhuman range of their abilities and needed superhuman challenges to advance. Though dodging bullets is still a bit beyond me. Even at my fastest, I'm 20 times slower than a bullet, and that's before Sarah's skills. Time for me to sweat, Arl said, jumping back into the sky to resume his drills. Nathan wasn't quite ready to resume himself. He walked over to Sarah, ruminating on what kind of practice might help both of them. It might be as simple as combining his ideas. He'd fly around and throw targets for her to hit. It would help him develop his control, and the extra level of danger might assist the rank up. Maybe. Hey, he greeted Sarah as he approached, not wanting to catch her by surprise. Getting bored, she grunted in response. There aren't enough fish for this to be good practice. You don't have an insight for summoning fish in that mental archive of yours, do you? The question threw Nathan for a loop. He gave it a serious second of thought, opening and closing his mouth. If you zap fish with electricity, they tend to jump. But I think that mostly works for fish in shallow water, not ocean fish. And having Stella electrocute the water seems like exactly the sort of thing that would draw the wrong kind of attention. He shook his head. Nothing practical, but I have a different idea. If you have some targets, I can go up and start throwing them around for you to shoot. Sarah pursed her lips and started rummaging through her bags. I don't have much that we could use, she trailed off, then pulled out an old and battered hatchet that lacked an edge. She looked at it oddly. Nathan recognized it. That's one of your training weapons. From before your level 81 class development. You threw that at me back at the Adventurers Guild in Gemor. His friend twirled the small axe around her hand, watching it spin with nostalgia. Yes, before you introduced a better weapon. Her other hand withdrew a revolver from a different pouch and weighed it against the axe. A strange comparison. She held the hatchet towards Nathan, handle first. This will be a good target. He hesitated before taking it. Are you sure? We're likely going to lose this to the ocean if your bullets don't outright destroy it. Sarah gave a sure nod, pulling out more battered practice weapons. I am. These are tools of my past, and I will not need them again. They seem fitting targets. If you're sure, Nathan said, holding out his hands to accept a sack that Sarah quickly filled with old training weapons. Everything from the hatchet to slightly rusted daggers, javelins with cracked hafts, and a few more exotic projectiles. I'll go out a few 100 feet and start hucking them around. The closer to me you hit them, the better. But I'm not the target. Sarah snorted but waved a hand in acknowledgement, pulling out her rifle and holding it ready. Nathan took to the sky, gaining some distance. He had to keep moving to keep pace with the ship, but that was nothing new. Once he judged the distance sufficient, he grabbed the hatchet out of the bag and hurled it off to the side. It had barely left his hands before a bullet nailed the metal axe head. It splintered with the sound of rending metal, and Nathan was peppered with fragments that stung against his skin. He looked back down towards Sarah, who was aiming her rifle towards Nathan. She took her hand off the trigger and waved it in a circle as if to say, "Get on with it." Nathan tried again, turning around to disguise his arm motions and juking left before hurling the next target straight up. Once again, Sarah nailed it mere feet from his hand, and a fragment of metal got in Nathan's eye. Ow. That's unpleasant, but good reinforcement for me to do better. How do I make it harder for her? I need to trick her about where it's going. Pretend to go one direction but actually go another. Nathan turned around and disguised his hand movements to make it harder for Sarah to track. He dodged one direction and another before hurling a dagger to the side. This one made it a little further before Sarah's bullet intercepted the flying metal. I should think of this in terms of dodging. I'm choosing what openings to show and trying to disguise them as much as possible. He grabbed two more of the weapons, swinging a hatchet wide without letting go and pitching a narrow dagger in the other direction. Sarah went for his fake, and a bullet hissed through the air to the side before a follow-up knocked the dagger out of the air a few seconds and 30 feet later. That's it. My movements are a form of communication, and I'm trying to lie with them. I should take inspiration from my disguise skills. How do I sell a movement without committing? Nathan practiced doing just that, dodging around in midair and occasionally hurling a target for Sarah to shoot. Sometimes he was successful, sometimes he wasn't, but it was good practice for both of them. Nathan was getting better, but so was Sarah. She fell for less of his tricks, so he got better at executing them. Visibility Control 5 achieved. That makes sense. The bag was getting empty, but Nathan didn't really notice. His focus was on the game, fully engaged in the rhythm of aerial maneuvering. He moved erratically, readying himself to go in one direction, and then using his aura and skills to redirect his momentum or shove off at a weird angle. He felt himself on the precipice of a development, but it wouldn't quite come through. It grew whenever he pulled off a tricky feint and made Sarah miss her shot. Don't push it, just memorize the feeling and what you're doing. You can get the development in the next actual fight. He also wasn't having trouble keeping up with the ship, pushing off hardest when he juked in the direction the ship was going. It was exhilarating. Eventually, he reached down into the sack and came up empty, having run through every single one of Sarah's arsenal of practice weapons. He looked down at the ship below, breathing hard and feeling exhilarated. Airwalking 8 achieved. Yes. Nathan shouted, scrubbing his hand through hair matted with sweat before he headed back to the ship. They'd acquired an audience, with all of the others having gathered to watch the practice session happening off the back of the ship. Evelyn clapped daintily from her chair and muttered something quiet as Nathan landed on the deck. His ears only just caught what sounded like a quote. True power is born of virtuosity and relentless practice. Sarah wore a similarly huge grin as she stored away her rifle. Her voice was excited. By the dawn's light, that's a target hit. A few Rancups and I developed steady hands to quick aim. The rest of the heirs congratulated her, though Arl grimaced and shot a quick look at Evelyn. Their captain seemed not to notice, smiling fondly at their joy and making no moves to involve herself. "Any developments for you, Nathan?" Stella asked. He grinned back. "I think I figured out an insight and got some important Rancups, including my talent." The heirs brought him into the celebration, and Arl pulled out some of the hoarded drinks, pouring around to toast their success. A cheer for the heirs, the youngest elites from Gemor who can still rank up from practice. Let's never forget that hard work returns treasure. The heirs drank, and then started discussing other ways they could work together to help improve their skills. "There is unexplored potential in our builds," Kochai said solemnly. "We have leveled quickly in the Dungeon of Giants' Rest, and now there are easy developments to be found in exploring all of our new abilities." Stella nodded along gleefully. "Why don't I try burning through one of your shields next? If you tried to angle it, it would make me focus the fire to keep it from deflecting. Eilin interrupted Katja before he could respond. The time for practice is done. There are dire hymns on the horizon. She gestured behind her towards the other side of the ship. Off in the far distance was a collection of gray clouds that took up a concerning fraction of the sky. They grew quickly, indicating that the storm was approaching them fast. The maelstrom hunts us.